The emergency klaxon had been silent for 6 hours when Queen Voltache finally understood she had made a catastrophic mistake. She stood at the viewport of her command vessel, watching what remained of the Duskara fleet, 14 ships reduced to debris fields that caught her system's twin suns like scattered diamonds. The humans had done that in 11 minutes. 11 minutes to erase 40 years of Duskara naval engineering, 3 generations of pilots, and every offensive asset the collective had committed to the Kereth corridor. Her chief strategist, advisor Kren, stood 2 paces behind her. He had not spoken since the battle feed cut to static. Neither had she. The human vessel, singular, a single ship, had emerged from the corridor's dark matter shadow without warning and without hesitation. No hailing frequency. No demand for surrender. It had simply begun, moving through the Duskara formation with the cold efficiency of a predator that had hunted this specific prey before, even though no human and Duskara vessel had ever met in combat before today. That was the part that kept turning in Voltache's mind. They fought like they had practiced this specific battle. Your Majesty. Kren's voice was careful, stripped of everything except necessary function. The human vessel is holding position at coordinates 9 Delta 7. They are transmitting on our diplomatic frequency. How long have they been transmitting? 4 hours and 17 minutes. She turned from the viewport. Kren's 4 eyes were steady, watching her with the measured calm that had made him valuable across 3 decades of service. He had advised her father. He had watched 2 queens make decisions that reshaped history. His stillness now told her more than any words could. He was frightened, and Kren did not frighten easily. What do they want? She asked. They want to talk. The irony did not escape her. The humans had destroyed her fleet without a single communication, and now they wanted conversation. She walked to the tactical display at the center of the bridge, studying the data her sensors had managed to collect before the battle ended. The human ship was called the Ardent. Its classification in their own military registry was listed as a patrol cruiser, not a warship, not a destroyer, not a dreadnought. A patrol cruiser. 14 ships. 1 patrol cruiser. She touched the sensor overlay, expanding the damage analysis. What disturbed her most was not the destruction. It was the precision. The Duskara fleet had been neutralized with virtually 0 overkill. Every ship was destroyed, yes, but the human vessel had not wasted a single strike on a vessel already falling. It had moved target to target, calculating structural failure thresholds with an accuracy that implied either computational intelligence beyond anything she had encountered or a crew that had run this exact simulation thousands of times. Both possibilities were unsettling in different ways. Open the channel, she said. The human who appeared on screen was not what she expected. She had studied human faces during the 3-year Kereth corridor dispute, had seen their ambassadors and analysts, had formed certain impressions. This human was young by their species standards, with close-cropped dark hair and an expression that contained nothing theatrical. No triumph, no aggression, no performance of dominance. He looked like someone finishing a report. Queen Voltache, he said. His pronunciation of her name was exact. I'm Captain Alara Voss of the UES Ardent. I apologize for the delayed contact. We needed to ensure there were no secondary threats before opening communication. Voltache studied him. You destroyed 14 vessels. Yes. Without warning. Your fleet entered the Kereth corridor under battle configuration with targeting systems active and weapons armed, Voss said. Under the Gareth Accords, which the Duskara Collective ratified in 2847, an armed approach in a contested corridor constitutes initiation of hostilities. We responded to initiated hostilities. The Gareth Accords. She had signed those documents herself. She had also, she realized now, never read the full annexure on corridor engagement protocols. She had left that to her legal team, who had left it to a subcommittee, who had filed the relevant clauses in a database that no one had consulted before authorizing this fleet movement. Your fleet was sent to pressure the corridor negotiation, she said, not asking. Stating, yes. Voss did not inflate it. He let the word carry its own weight. And you consider that a proportionate response to a negotiating tactic. Something moved in Voss's expression, not anger, not satisfaction. It was more like a teacher watching a student finally arrive at the correct door. Your Majesty, he said, I want to be clear about something, because I think there's been a foundational misunderstanding about humanity that may have contributed to this situation. We don't use military force as a negotiating tactic. If we deploy military force, it means we've already decided the negotiation has ended." He paused, and the pause was precise. "We are still willing to negotiate. But you needed to understand what the alternative looks like before we could have that conversation honestly." The bridge was absolutely silent. Vio looked at the debris field behind the human captain's transmission signal, the remnants of her fleet hanging in the dark. She understood, with a cold and total clarity, that she had misread humanity so completely that it had nearly ended her civilization's military capacity in 11 minutes. "I'll hear your terms," she said. Voss nodded once. "We'll begin with the corridor boundaries." 3 days earlier, the decision to send the fleet had seemed not just reasonable but elegant. Queen Valtha had sat in her War Council chamber surrounded by her finest strategic minds, and they had all agreed humanity was cautious, deliberate, and deeply averse to conflict escalation. The academic literature was unanimous. 12 independent analysts had studied human military history and reached the same conclusion. Humans started wars rarely, preferred diplomacy, and would absorb significant pressure before reaching a breaking point. The plan had been clean. Move the fleet to the corridor entrance. Not through it, not aggressively, but close enough to signal seriousness. Create leverage. Force the humans back to the table with more favorable terms for Duskara mineral extraction rights. It had worked against the Vethri. It had worked against the Salthane. Every major power that had faced Duskara diplomatic pressure backed down from fleet demonstrations. No one on the council had raised a dissenting voice, and that, Valtha now understood, was the most catastrophic failure of all. Because someone should have asked what deeply averse to conflict escalation actually meant in practice. It meant that humans had a threshold, and the threshold was not flexible, and the threshold had a name, the Gareth Accords Annexure, subsection 14, paragraph 3, and the Duskara fleet had crossed it at 0600 hours 3 days ago when the first weapon system went active inside the corridor's contested boundary. And, from that moment, humanity's response had been not aversion, not de-escalation, but the Ardent. The Ardent, alone, had ended the question. Valtha sat now in the small diplomatic chamber adjacent to the main bridge, waiting for Captain Voss's secondary communication. She had asked for 30 minutes to consult with her advisors. Voss had granted it without comment. There was something in that simple acquiescence that bothered her, the confidence of someone who did not need to apply pressure because the pressure was already fully applied and would not increase or decrease based on any theatre she performed. Kren sat across from her. His secondary hands, the smaller pair at his mid-torso that he only used when thinking deeply, were folded against each other. "They expected us," he said. "The Accords." "No." He shook his head slowly. "The Accords gave them legal justification, but they expected us specifically. The speed of the response. The positioning. The Ardent was already in the corridor shadow before our fleet reached the boundary. They were waiting." Valtha stared at him. "Intelligence. They knew we were coming. They anticipated the pressure tactic. They anticipated it would cross the Accords threshold." Kren's voice was careful, unhurried. "And they chose to let it happen." "Why?" "Because they needed us to understand something." He paused. "And a briefing document would not have been sufficient." She leaned back. The diplomatic chamber was small and, plain by Duskara standards, built for function rather than ceremony. She suddenly found herself grateful for that, the absence of the elaborate throne room architecture that she normally inhabited, the vast ceilings and carved stone meant to convey power. All of that seemed very distant from the reality of this moment. "The Vethri called humanity paper soldiers," she said. "Yes. Because they backed down from the Vethri corridor dispute 8 years ago." Kren nodded. "They backed down because the Vethri had not crossed the Accords threshold. The Vethri fleet stayed outside the contested boundary. The diplomatic solution was still viable." He met her eyes. The Vethri thought they had demonstrated that humanity would yield. What the Vethri actually demonstrated was that humanity had read the Accords correctly. The weight of it settled over her like something physical. 8 years of intelligence reports, of analysis, of accumulated strategic doctrine, all built on the wrong interpretation of a single data point. Humanity had not retreated from the Vethri because they were cautious. They had de-escalated because the Vethri had not yet given them sufficient legal cause. And every subsequent diplomatic encounter, every human concession, every measured response had been interpreted across the galaxy as evidence of fundamental restraint. No one had considered that the restraint might be structural rather than temperamental. That humans were not unwilling to fight. They were simply unwilling to fight without cause. And, once cause existed, once it was clean, documented, and ratified by treaty, they did not escalate. They did not threaten. They did not send a larger fleet as a counter-demonstration. They sent one ship, and the ship was enough, because they had spent decades ensuring that one ship would always be enough. When the communication channel reopened, Voss was in the same position, with the same expression. He had not used the 30 minutes to adjust his posture or compose himself. He had simply waited. "Captain," Valtice said, "before we discuss corridor boundaries, I want to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Did you know we were coming?" A pause. Not a long one, but measured. "Yes." "And you let us cross the threshold." "We gave your fleet every opportunity to reverse course. 3 automated warnings were transmitted on standard military frequencies at intervals of 20 minutes before your weapon systems activated. They're in the engagement log if you'd like to review them." Voss's expression remained neutral. Your fleet didn't acknowledge them. She had not known about the warnings. Someone on the fleet command had received them and made a decision not to report them up the chain. Someone who had believed the humans were bluffing, or who had believed the warnings were procedural and meaningless, or who had simply not wanted to interrupt the mission with complications. That person was now debris in the Kereth corridor. "I see," she said. "I want to be honest with you," Voss said. "We don't want a war with the Duskara Collective. We want a fair resolution to the corridor dispute. We want trade. We want the relationship to work." He paused. "But we need you to understand us correctly, not as we've apparently been understood." "Cautious," she said. "Restrained. Unlikely to escalate." "We are patient," he said. "Those are different things." The negotiation lasted 9 hours. Valtice had expected it to feel like a surrender. It didn't. Voss negotiated without triumph, without any attempt to extract maximum concession from her weakened position. He proposed boundary demarcations that were genuinely fair, mineral extraction schedules that accounted for Duskara economic cycles, and a joint patrol protocol for the corridor that split oversight evenly. When she questioned a boundary line that seemed slightly disadvantageous, he moved it. When her trade advisor flagged an extraction timeline, the humans adjusted it. They were not being generous out of performance or strategy. They were working toward an agreement that would actually hold, and they seemed to understand, with a clarity that she was only now achieving, that a punitive settlement would simply delay the next conflict. They weren't interested in a next conflict. That was the thing she had to keep reminding herself. Everything she knew about military victory said that the victorious party leveraged their position. Everything she had been taught about power dynamics said that the party holding the strongest cards played them. The humans had the strongest cards she had ever seen anyone hold across a negotiating table, and they were playing for a stable corridor, not maximum extraction. Near the end of the 7th hour, a young officer stepped briefly into Voss's frame and placed a data tablet on the table beside him. Voss glanced at it. Something in his expression shifted, almost nothing, a slight tightening, and Valtice's instincts, honed across decades of reading faces across species lines, told her it was bad news. "A moment," he said, and the channel muted. Kren leaned close to her. "What is it?" "I don't know." 3 minutes passed. The channel reopened. "Queen Valtice," Voss said. "I need to inform you of a development. The Duskara vessel Kethra's claim departed your home system 40 minutes ago on a heading toward the Ellerin station. It's carrying what our intelligence suggests is a secondary strike element, drone carriers, pre-authorized before today's engagement." The air left the room. She had forgotten. In the shock of the fleet's destruction, in the 3 days of mounting crisis and the 9 hours of negotiation, she had completely forgotten that her war council had authorized a secondary contingency, a fallback option. If the primary fleet demonstration failed, the Kethra's claim would proceed to Ellerin Station and disable its communication array, creating a news blackout that would give Duskara negotiators cover to reframe the corridor dispute before any galactic media could carry the story. It had seemed like a sensible contingency 3 days ago. How long before it reaches the station? She asked, and she was surprised by how steady her own voice was. 6 hours. And if it proceeds? Voss looked at her directly. The Ellerin station is a civilian communications hub. It houses 412 non-Duskara personnel. Any attack on it constitutes an act of war under the Gethra Convention, which every major civilization, including the Duskara Collective, has ratified. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I have already authorized 2 UES vessels to intercept. If the Kethra's claim continues on its current heading and does not respond to our warnings, they will engage. 9 hours of careful negotiation. 9 hours of building something workable, something real, something that could have ended a crisis without further destruction. Can I reach them? She asked. We can relay a command signal through our array. It will reach the Kethra's claim in approximately 7 minutes. Kren was already writing the order. He placed the tablet in front of her without a word. She read it, signed it, and looked at Voss. Transmit it. Transmitting now. 7 minutes of silence. The longest 7 minutes of her reign. She sat without speaking, without moving, aware that somewhere in the dark between stars, a ship was either turning or wasn't, and the answer to that question would determine whether the last 9 hours had meant anything at all, or whether this day would end with the humans learning something else about Duskara capability that she would not survive. The confirmation signal arrived at 7 minutes and 40 seconds. Kethra's claim is reversing course, the human officer said from off-screen.
Valde Brätthed.
Voss sat with the same expression he had worn for 9 hours. I'm glad, he said. And it was simple, and it was true, and it was the most genuinely frightening thing he had said all day, because she could see that he meant it, that he had been hoping for this outcome while simultaneously and completely prepared for the other one, and that the preparation had not been theater. She looked at him across the negotiating table, this young captain of a patrol cruiser who had ended her fleet in 11 minutes and spent 9 hours building fair terms, and she understood something that she suspected very few non-human rulers had ever understood in time to matter. Humanity did not start wars. They had spent centuries, she would later learn, building the capacity to end them, any of them, fast and completely, so that the ending would be so undeniable that starting another one would require a full accounting of what the last ending had looked like. They had built treaties not as constraints but as architecture, legal frameworks that defined exactly where the line was so that no one could claim surprise when crossing it had consequences. They had made themselves patient, and reliable, and honest in negotiation, and absolutely devastating in response, and they had done it deliberately, systematically, and with the long view of a species that had survived its own wars and decided to survive everyone else's. Captain Voss, she said. Your Majesty. The agreement we've been drafting. She paused. I want to finalize it. So do I. And I want to add one additional clause.
À mutuelle consultation protocole.
Before either party takes any military action in a contested region, we communicate directly. She looked at him. I want to make sure there are no more misunderstandings about what certain decisions will mean. Voss studied her for a moment. Then, something changed in his face, not quite a smile, but the immediate precursor to one, something that appeared and held before settling into professional neutrality. That's a good clause, he said. We accept. The final document was signed 4 hours later. Kren witnessed it. The human officer, whose name, she learned, was Lieutenant Dara Mai, and who had barely spoken during 9 hours of negotiation, signed as secondary witness on the human side. The signing was quiet and without ceremony. As the channel prepared to close, Voss said, Safe travels, Your Majesty. And you, Captain. She paused. I have one last question. Go ahead. The Ardent. She glanced toward the viewport, toward the debris field that was still faintly visible at sensor range. Was it truly enough? One ship. Voss considered the question with the same measured care he had brought to every other moment of the day. It was what was needed, he said finally. Not more. Not less. The channel closed. Voss stood alone for a moment in the small diplomatic chamber, the signed agreement displayed on the screen before her, the debris field somewhere beyond the hull, and the vast, restructured understanding of a species settling into her mind like sediment after a storm. She had nearly ended her civilization today. Not through malice or aggression, but through the specific catastrophe of being confident about something she had never actually tested. She walked back to the main bridge. "Kren," she said. "Your Majesty. When we return home, I want the full Gareth Accords reviewed. Every annexure, every subsection, every clause that defines when humanity considers a threshold crossed." She paused at the viewport, looking at the twin suns of the corridor system. "And, then, I want the same review done for every other treaty we've signed in the last 20 years. Yes, Your Majesty." A pause. "And the council members who authorized the fleet movement." She thought of the officer on the Kethra's claim who had received 3 warnings and said nothing. She thought of the subcommittee that had filed the Accord's annexure without reading it. She thought of 12 analysts who had studied humanity and reached the same wrong conclusion because they had all begun from the same wrong assumption. "Accountability," she said, "but no purge. I want to understand how we built a strategic doctrine on a misreading, not punish people for the doctrine." She turned from the viewport. "We made this mistake together. We'll correct it together." Kren bowed his head once, the slow deliberate bow that in Duskara custom meant genuine respect rather than formal compliance. The Ardent was still visible on the long-range sensor, holding position at 9 Delta 7. In 4 hours, it would return to whatever assignment a patrol cruiser normally held when it was not rewriting history. Captain Voss would file his engagement report. The UES military would process it as a standard corridor defense action under the Gareth Accords. There would be no celebration, she suspected.
No ceremony.
The humans would move on with the particular confidence of a species that had learned, over a very long time, not to confuse the ending of a conflict with the ending of a threat. They would watch. They would wait. They would be patient. And, if the Duskara Collective ever misread them again, they would be ready. Voss sat in her command chair and began the long journey home, carrying the weight of what she now knew and the fragile, real thing she had somehow managed to preserve despite every decision that should have destroyed it. Peace, she understood now, was not the absence of the capacity for war. It was the decision, made by someone capable of ending everything, to build something instead. 2:2.